again this year, and we're being recorded now. I
Right.
should first one thank Diana for helping me with this, and also introduce her as, what do we call you now? The National Board Vice Chair? Is that about right? Something like that?
That's right.
Okay,
If
well,
it's not, it should be.
we have our National Board Vice Chair. We have Jim Roberts, our National Secretary, and I see Dave Wilmer there, the National Treasurer. So I appreciate each of y'all coming in. Well, let me hit this OK over here for it being recorded. All right. So some ground rules before we get started for the concourse stuff. One is that stay muted unless you're called on. That avoids having some background noise take over the presentation. When you have questions, put your questions in chat and chat them to everyone. That way both Diana and I can see them, and she can alert me when it's time to stop and answer a question. And with this smaller group, we can probably do a really good job of making sure we get to everybody's questions if we have any. And in the unlikely event that we get Zoom bombed, and we hadn't seen this happen for a number of years now, but if we get Zoom bombed and we cannot recover, what we'll do is terminate the Zoom presentation, immediately come up with a new Zoom link and send it out via email. So if that were to happen, pretty unlikely, but if that were to happen, just go ahead and look at your email and we'll restart with a new Zoom link. Okay, that said, let me go ahead and share here. And let's see. You never really know with PowerPoint how it's going to work. So let's see. All right, I think I've got the right thing up. You should see the first slide that says Concours Judging of Mercedes-Benz Automobiles.
Got it.
Okay. All right. I've got to move something around on my screen a little bit here. Okay, I'm going to push that over there. All right. So what we're going to do today is probably a little quicker than we have in the past, go through the rules and make sure that you know how to judge. Here's the agenda. The agenda is essentially why we teach the class, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some revisions which are in a draft rule book that we sent out in advance, so you all had a chance to look at it, and what we expect from the entrant, what we expect from the judge, kind of how to score, and a comparison of show versus street versus modified, and then very quickly through most frequently deducted areas, I'll do a little bit of discussion on how to score and how much to take off, and then we'll have a little quiz. The quiz will be a little bit shorter than previous. I've got to be over at Rich's house at 7:45 in the morning, so I'm going to make this a little, don't want to take half the night doing this. Okay, why do we do this? Making sure that we have enough judges to actually put on concours is really important. It's probably the hardest thing about doing a concours is having enough judges. And of course, we also want to make sure that when you judge a concours on the West Coast versus when you judge the concours on the East Coast, you judge it about the same way, and that we judge it objectively. And so you're going to learn what we expect for judges and what you're responsible for and what to look for and how to use the score sheets. And of course, when you're done, you're certified to judge. And I think half of you here are already certified to judge. And one of the points here is, you're not going to know everything, but just be confident you will be able to judge. And notice I said be consistent, and I even put that in a bigger font. I think being consistent is the most important thing in concours judging. Be consistent in the way you judge. And as long as you are, you'll do fine, even if you're in an area that you're not very comfortable with. I personally like engine compartments, but a lot of people don't. But if you're consistent in your judging, you'll do fine with the engine compartment, even if you're not totally familiar with it. The other thing I like to think about at this point, if you remember Stephen Covey's, let me click that. I didn't mean to. Remember Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? One of those was begin with the end in sight. Well, what end are we after here? Now, at the end of the day on a concours, we want the scoring to be done in a reasonable time so that we can get the awards done in an award ceremony before the sun goes down. We want to have no ties. We want the winners to be the right cars, the ones that are the best. And we want everybody, the volunteers, the entrants, and the judges, all to feel good about the event. And so we approach our judging
Excuse me, Gary, are
in
you
that
on page
manner.
4?
Say that again?
Are you on slide 4?
Yeah, I'm on slide 4. This is
Okay,
just
I'm
my
sorry.
editorial comment.
Okay.
So to do those things, the basic points of this whole presentation are: be consistent in the way you take off points from car to car, take points off commensurate with the allocation on the score sheet, recognizing that street and for show categories, half the scoring is on authenticity and half is on condition. All right, let's go on. The references, the older rule book, we sent that out as well, and the draft rule book, which has not been signed yet, but what you find is, here's kind of changes. There really aren't any changes to show or street categories, and most of what you're going to be judging are show and street category cars. Now, with the minor subtle little change is we decided to make pinstripes okay on all cars. Now, pinstripes were generally a dealer installed option. The car did not come from the factory with those. And we saw a lot of 107s with pinstripes. And we said, okay, in the last revision, pinstripes on 107s will be okay. And so then we got well, what about on 124s and 126s and so on? So we said, fine, pinstripes will be fine on all cars. We will not penalize pinstripes. Now, the biggest changes to the draft rule book are the AMG category. And this is going to be a challenging one, but it's one that you're probably not going to see that much, except at things like Legends of the Audubon and larger shows. There's two classes. There's pre and post merger. The cars need to be greater than 25 years old. And we're judging them essentially the way you judge in show. That is 100 points against the way they came from the factory, or for the pre-merger cars, the way that they were delivered by AMG. That's challenging, and it's not something I know very much about. Dave Abar is kind of the most knowledgeable person on that, and when there's questions on that, that's where those questions need to go. Now, the modified category used to be called custom category, and we've divided that into 4 classes. And we're calling them tuner, tribute, custom, and other. Tuner is kind of like Rentec or Lorenzor or Brabus. Tribute is like when you build a car like like the Pink Pig, or maybe the 500 SEC rally car, or even if you built one to be like a pre-merger AMG that's not a pre-merger AMG, that would be in tribute. Custom is a modified car that has a Mercedes, still has a Mercedes appearance, and others kind of the other dogs and cats. And in modified category, we do not judge authenticity. And so it's only on condition and workmanship and presentation. And I'll go more into that in a moment. We changed Silver Star just a little bit. Photos not required, which makes it just a little bit easier to process the stuff. And we are encouraging Silver Star at non-concours events to get more people involved in doing that, which is something I've been kind of doing anyway. So I want to put together this slide to show you the categories that are in the new rule book. So we've got show, which is the same old show category. It's the full concours, and the cars have to be greater than 25 years old, scored on authenticity and condition, and uses the full 100-point scorecard. Street, as it was before, scored on authenticity and condition. Underside is not judged, and the 8 points that were for undercarriage allow us to give a mileage and age credit of up to 4 points each. And we'll talk a little bit more about calculating that. The AMG category, again, 100 points, scored on authenticity and condition, greater than 25 years old, 2 classes. Modified uses something that's a lot like the street scorecard in that the bottom isn't judged, and you can add 4 points for workmanship and 4 points for presentation. Authenticity is not judged, so you're scoring workmanship, operability, condition, and cleanliness. And Silver Star, which is not a competitive category, but it is a category. And Silver Star was designed to get people to come to the concours and then realize that maybe they should participate. Okay, so let's talk about what we expect of the entrant. Well, one, we expect them to be there on time, get parked, get the car ready, if they're using paper forms, fill out the paper forms. Yeah, and have everything done. There'll usually be a time where you say stop cleaning, where you are starting to judge so that there's no advantage gained by somebody that gets judged later than someone that gets judged earlier. And most importantly, the entrant needs to be somewhere near the vehicle, so they're there to present the vehicle when it's time for it to be judged. Very frustrating when you're judging and you can't find the owner of the car, because one of our rules is judges don't touch the car. And so it's very hard to judge the car if the owner's not there. And I mentioned here, have all extra seat and floor coverings removed. People can really get hung up over that. If I go to judge car and the floor coverings are in, and the floor mats and stuff, I'll just judge floor mats instead of the carpet. They're usually in worse condition anyway. And so, it's not to the person's advantage to leave the seat and floor covers in. If they leave them in, they pay the consequences. So I don't get too excited about that. Now, we expect the entrant to stand back when judging begins and kind of not be in the way, not really being too close earshot, but be available for questions. We might want to ask something about the authenticity or the color or the mileage or something like that. And the entrant can ask questions, and I'm glad to answer questions, but usually I have a number of cars I have to judge and I feel a time pressure. So I usually tell an entrant when they're asking questions, I'm glad to answer your questions, but after I get done judging, then I come back and talk to them afterwards, because it's really important to get the cars done at the time that the chief judge tells you to. And when you go to Cars and Coffee, you see people that have these stands with these posters about the car or magazine articles or things like that. We don't care about that. We don't care to judge that at all. That's not part of the judging. You just ignore it. And we expect the people to stay until the event's over. It's there for the enjoyment of spectators. And also, when you have people walking around, you don't need to be trying to move cars around that. I consider that to be a safety issue. So we expect the entrant to stay the entire event. All right, what do we expect from judges? Well, first, as the judging team goes to the car, we introduce yourself to the entrant and we thank them for bringing their vehicle. And then the most basic rule, and something that makes Mercedes-Benz Club of America concours different from some other concours that I do, is you don't touch the car as the judge. And I really like this rule. I mean, you don't touch the car as the judge, which means you don't run your finger across the engine area to see if there's dirt picked up on your white glove. There are clubs that do that, okay? We do not do that. Don't touch the car, don't get in the car. Ask the entrant to open the doors, the hoods, and the trunk. Anything that has to involve touching the car, ask the entrant to do it. And dress so that you don't have any potential for damaging the car. Don't have metal hanging down. Slide your belt buckle to the side. Don't lean on the car anyway, but to make sure that you have no potential at all to have something fall on a car or scratch a car. Okay, if you got to ask the entrant something, the judging team leader for your team should do that. And that could be things like, proof of options or the color. But I want to point out, we give the entrant the benefit of the doubt. And I say that because, despite the fact that you think you really, really know everything about a certain type of Mercedes, like, when this feature showed up, when this option showed up, when this part showed up, what you find with Mercedes is they very often do running changes. And they've been known to do things like assemble cars out of parts that are left over on the shelf as they get near the end of a run. And they also tend to be very, especially newer ones, to be very responsive to what a customer wants. And so just because a car is supposed to be a certain way, it could have been built differently. And so it's very important to have an open mind about that. Ask the entrant about it and give the entrant the benefit of the doubt. I am aware of a car in Carolina chapter, I think it's a 94 SL 600 that has colors that were never available on the car. but it turns out it was a Mercedes show car. They built two of them, and the owner has the documentation to show that that's one of the cars that they did that with, and it was Dizino before they brought out Dizino. And so it is as it was built by the factory. And so there's subtle little things like that, and hopefully the owner will have that information. But so I encourage you, give the owner the benefit of the doubt. It's really best not to make the owner unhappy. I mean, I had one time when I was judging a R129 SL500. I was doing exterior paint and finish, and I just commented that he had the AMG badge on the right-hand side of the car, and the car never came with that. And he was irate. He ended up complaining to the president about me and all that. And I never even took off for it. But so, people can be pretty sensitive to such things. Anyway, the other thing, walk through the field before you start judging. Now, a couple reasons for that. One, hopefully the organizer has parked all of the cars you're judging together, but that doesn't always happen. And sometimes you have to go find all your cars. The other piece of this is, figure out where you're going to start. If I could have perfect knowledge, I would always start at the worst car. But you really can't tell that. It's a lot easier to start on a car that has a number of deficiencies than it is to start on a car that's nearly perfect. If you start on a car that's nearly perfect and then you get to a car that has a lot of deficiencies, you get into that. Did I look at the previous car? And if you're not sure about that, for consistency, you probably shouldn't take off. So you're much better off if you can start on a car that has a number of deficiencies. Hard to tell, though, from just walking around, but I just offer that as a thought. The other thought on that is if you're doing show category and you're doing chassis undercarriage, you might want to start on the lowest car, the car that sits closest to the ground. And I say that because there are things you're not going to be able to see on a car that's very low to the ground. If you can't see them on that car, then you shouldn't judge them on the other cars as well, for consistency's sake. So just some thoughts on how to strategize as you do this walk through the field. All right. Now there's basically two ways to do the teams. And I was originally taught that we do a team, like 4 or 5 separate teams based on the parts of the scorecard. And so there would be a team for interior, a team for glass and lights, a team for engine, a team for, each part of the scorecard. And those teams would start in different places and then go through. That meaning that every car would have either 4 or 5 teams having come judge it. And the whole reason for that is because the scorecard had 5 or 4 sections, depending on whether it's a street or a show. It would have either 4 or 5 sections on it, and you couldn't judge either of those sections concurrently because it was all on one page. And so we kind of evolved into doing it separately like that. I don't do it that way anymore. What we do now, if I have the option, is to do a team that does the entire car simultaneously. And you do this by approaching the car. Of course, you introduce yourself to the entrant. You start with the car fully closed up, windows up, door shut, hood shut, trunk shut. And the paint and coach work judge walks around it and looks at the panel gaps. When that judge is done with that, then you ask the entrant to open up everything and you commence judging concurrently all of the sections. And this is really easiest if you have software-based scoring, but you can do it with paper scorecards just by either having 5 copies of the scorecard or splitting the pieces of the scorecard out on separate pieces of paper as well. This is better for the entrant because he only has to deal with sitting there and waiting for one team to come instead of 4 or 5 separate teams. So I think it's allows the entrant to then go on and enjoy the show instead of waiting for the other 3 or 4 teams. And I encourage you to try to do it this way, even if you're still using paper scorecards. Okay, so the responsibilities of the judges. Well, of course, evaluate your area in objective fashion and deduct only for the actual flaws. That's kind of obvious. But know the score sheet. Now, I don't say memorize the score sheet, but be familiar enough with the score sheet that you know where things are on it. And I'd like to use a score sheet as a guide in the order that I look at the car. And that keeps me very consistent in the way I look at a car from one car to the other. And even using computerized scoring, like walking around with an iPad, I've known people that want to take a paper scorecard just to help them remember that. Although all the computer scoring methods that we have used are essentially identical to the paper scorecards. And here's an important point. Always remain within the scope of your judging responsibilities. And this is like if you're the, say, interior judge, and you have just happened to notice something over in the engine compartment. Ignore it. Consistency requires the same set of eyes look at the same places on the car for every car. And so if you're the interior judge, just do the interior. Very important. And I think consistency is the most important thing we do here. So this is a basic consistency rule. Stay within your scope of your judging responsibilities. And of course, watch the clock to get done on time. If the chief judge will normally tell you in the judges meeting, please have the judging done by X time. And so all you really have to do is divide the amount of time you have by the number of cars to figure out how much time you can afford to spend on each car. Some organizations actually provide a timekeeper with a stopwatch. And so you run the stopwatch and spend exactly the same amount of time on every car. And certainly you can do that. That's a reasonable thing to do. And when in doubt about the authenticity, consult with the chief judge in a discreet manner. But remember, give the entrant the benefit of the doubt. I previously spoke a little bit about this. I also remember spending a fair amount of time with Mark Ritchie on his 300 SL one time, and just seeing all the little differences on that car versus the other 300 SLs because it's an early production car. And so just because you think you know that something is certainly the way it is, it may not be. So, give the entrant the benefit of the doubt, especially, hopefully they'll have some documentation of things that are different. Okay, don't judge a close friend's car or a car you're familiar with if you can really avoid it. And when we take something off, when we have a deduction, we always want to describe what it is in the comments column. Paper, computer, whatever. You've got to describe what it is. That's for transparency, but it also helps the entrant understand what he's being judged deficient in so he can come back the next time and correct it. And we will typically make these available to the entrant afterwards. So make sure that you're clear about what it is you're taking off for. If you see a safety issue, tell the entrant immediately. Safety issues are like fuel leaks, coolant leaks. I've seen cracked tire sidewalls that the owner wasn't aware of, things like that. Let the entrant know about safety issues immediately. And every once in a while, you run into an entrant that's really trying to ask lots and lots of questions to the point that it interferes with your judging. And you just got to be tactful with that and ask them to, tell them you'll come back afterwards and answer your questions, but ask them to step back so that you can actually get the judging done. You can tell them that, I've got this many cars to do and I've got to really focus on getting your car done so I can get to the rest of them. And let your team leader deal with that. And I mentioned those displays that we ignore. So, if I were being really tricky, I would probably put one of those displays over a stain in the carpet so you wouldn't see it. So ask them to remove those so that you can see under them if they've got them laid out in the trunk. And generally, don't come back to a car and rejudge it. I know of times when it's been appropriate to rejudge, but you really want to try to avoid that. Be very thorough the first time you look at a car and try never to have to go back. And also for consistency's sake, don't ask another team to make a judgment for you. If in doubt, ask the chief judge, but don't ask another team. Again, for consistency. And never, never, never hold little meetings about the car within earshot of the entrant. Never, never, never. Okay, because remember, we want the entrant to come back. We want them to have a good time. And especially, you can't sit there and say negative things about their car within the earshot of them. Wait. Okay. Yeah, I mentioned already, don't make other teams aware of a flaw outside of your judging assignments. I mean, we want the same people looking at the same things, the same eyes for consistency. So, don't tell other teams, oh, that's screwed up on that car over there. Let them find it or not find it. But for consistency's sake, don't you try that. And every once in a while, if you have an irate entrant, let the chief judge or the concourse chair take care of that. You don't see that very much. Okay. I saw one once where the person was irate that we did not judge their car that they had entered into Silver Star. And he did not understand that Silver Star was not a competitive category for judging like the rest of the cars. And he was irate. It was really amazing. Unfortunately, I had a near bodyguard there and who took care of it, but it was really kind of ugly. Never judge your own vehicle. Never judge a class that you have a vehicle in. The chief judge will normally screen when doing the assignments to try to make certain that you are not assigned a class that you have a car in. If you're sitting there in the judges meeting and the chief judge assigns you a class that you have a car in, you've got to tell the chief judge, I can't do that because I've got a car in that class, and the chief judge will switch your assignment. But above all, consistency is vital. Be consistent in your scoring. So let me give you some other thoughts on how to be consistent. Well, what does consistency mean? It means taking the same amount off for the same deficiency. That's kind of obvious. But there's more to it than that. First, you got to judge the cars in the same condition, like top up or top on, windows up. I've walked up to cars before that are convertibles with the top down. We have to ask the entrant to go ahead and put the top up because that's what we're doing today. Conversely, we've done a top-down concours before where we judged all the cars with the top down. That's okay too, but you've got to judge the cars in the same condition. You also have to judge the same characteristics. For example, some cars, like take 107s for example. Early 107s had the battery in the engine compartment. Later 107s had the battery in the trunk. The score sheet has the battery under engine. It would not be fair to judge the battery on the cars that have the battery in the engine compartment and then not judge it in the ones that have the battery in the trunk. And so for classes like that, we just don't judge the battery. Some modern cars don't have spare tires. If they're in a class where some of the cars have spare tires, some of the cars don't have spare tires, we don't judge the spare tires. So to be fair, we've got to judge the same characteristics. And that's a part of walking around beforehand. If you have a class where you see 107s, you have old 107s and new 107s, you're not going to judge the battery. And I advise you to judge in the same order and use the score sheet as a guide. For example, I have a couple of score sheets here in front of me for engine compartment. First thing's cooling system, then it's HVAC system, then it's engine, exhaust manifolds, and mounts. I try to go and judge in that order to make myself be consistent. Now, I also try to put my eyes in the same place and physically be in the same place. For an engine compartment, I usually start on the left side of the car and look at the engine from that side. Then I walk to the front of the car, I look at the engine from front center line. Then I walk to the right side of the car and look at the engine from the right side. So the same motion, kind of the same places to put your eyes to try to be consistent. And I just, if you've noticed, I'm really emphasizing consistency. It's because it's really, really important to make this work properly and to be fair to the entrant. Okay. Do you have any questions I need to answer? I guess I don't have anything. Okay. I'll go on. Okay. So the scoring system, I hope y'all have some score sheets out in front of you. We have all cars use a 100-point scoring system, but we implement it differently depending on which category you're in. Show and AMG use all 100 points on the car. And so they use the same score sheet. And I'll point out that our minimum deduction is 1/4 of a point. And there are 5 areas on the score sheet. You don't have to memorize these numbers because you'll have the score sheet in front of you. But I'll point out, we've got paint, coachwork, interior, engine compartment, lights, glass, rubber, chrome trim, and chassis. There's only 8 points on chassis. And for street, instead of doing chassis, we use 8 points for mileage and age bonus. For modify, we use those 8 points for a workmanship and presentation bonus. So we don't do the underside of the car in street or modified. Whoops, skip that. Now, the emphasis for street, show, and AMG is for on authenticity and condition. Except in the paint category, you start looking at the paint category and there are deductions on paint quality, quality of body work, imperfections and such. But typically what you're looking at is going to be authenticity and condition in most areas on the score sheet. Now, you'll notice also at the bottom of each of the categories in the score sheet, there is a separate line item for cleanliness, corrosion, leaks, and stains. And so, yeah, our concours and MBCA, it's not just who has the cleanest car. I mean, it's mostly authenticity and condition. In fact, there's really only in street, there's 6 points for dirt, corrosion, and show category, there's only 7 points for dirt and corrosion. So mostly it's authenticity and condition. It's not just about who has the cleanest car. That also makes us different from some of the other clubs where it's all about the cleanest car. So how do you do this authenticity and condition thing? Well, they're combined within the line item in every category. So half of the points that you see on the score sheet are allocated to authenticity and half of the points are allocated to condition. Now, for authenticity, we expect the replacement parts, the things that you see on the car, are official Mercedes-Benz replacement parts. And if they're not, they get some points off on authenticity. Now, realistically, most places you can't see whether it's an original Mercedes-Benz part or not, and that's fine. There are places you can. Coolant hoses, for example, you can usually see the Mercedes-Benz part number. One of the glaring examples is for the M119 engines that have the coil unplugged. You open the hood and you see all the coils sitting there. And if it's not an original Mercedes coil, you don't see the Mercedes-Benz part number. And if it's an original Mercedes-Benz part number, a coil, you'll see the Bosch part number or the Beru part number, and above it you see the Mercedes-Benz part number, and it just jumps out at you, especially if some of them are original Mercedes and some of them aren't. And so where you can tell the difference, if it's not one of the original parts, then that's an authenticity deduction. Did we skip over slide 20 by chance? Did we skip over slide 20? Dave Wilmer asked, "Do we slip over slide 20 by chance?" What you don't know, Dave Wilmer, is that I have a whole bunch of slides here that are hidden. And so the numbers of these slides may or may not be consecutive. I can do this class in a much longer version, and I decided not to. So there's a lot of hidden slides in here. Okay. Anyway, so let's contrast show and AMG versus street. And show and AMG category cars have to be 25 years old, at least. And as I said, you use the entire 100-point scorecard, and you can trailer the car. For street does not have to be 25 years old. You judge at 92 points, and there's a bonus 4 points for age and 4 points for mileage. And you do this by dividing the age by 4. So yeah, every 5 years is an extra point of age. And for the mileage, you divide the mileage by 50,000 miles and come up with a fraction, which can be up to 4. And you keep all the digits. And that's important because, say, the answer is 2.532. Keeping all the digits pretty much prevents you from ever having a tie in street category. And honestly, ties are really bad. So you really want to avoid ties. Keep all those digits when you do that calculation. Now in street category, trailering to the event results in a 2-point deduction unless the car is not street legal. If you've got a race car or something like that in street category, it's okay to trailer. Otherwise, you lose 2 points for that. Now, there's some other rules in street that are a little different. And looking carefully at the rule book, in show, it comments that all 5 tires should match unless it has the original spare, and they all must be the original size. Also, optional wheels are acceptable as long as they were available for that year of the car. And if you look down at the bottom of the score sheet, there is a little note there that says if it has wheels that are not correct for the car, then it's a 0.5 point deduction. You can do car badges and stuff. MBCA badges are fine. One of the other subtle differences between street and show is that for street category, it's acceptable to have European headlights on cars that did not originally have European headlights. In show category, the car is supposed to have what it was originally delivered with. And of course, for street class, since we're not doing the bottom, we're not inspecting the engine compartment below the body sheet metal either. All right, so here is a show category score sheet. You see engine compartment, you see paint coach work, you see the maximum points, and you see these little notes at the bottom, the first of which I just mentioned. The second one is a note about change of color. And the penalty for changing the color from the original color is a 0.5 point, unless it's a color that was available on that car that year. And if that's the case, then it's only a 0.25 point deduction. And the back side of the show category score sheet. And notice again, there's only 8 points in chassis and underbody. And I try to encourage people to enter the show class because honestly, it's only 8 points and half the stuff you can't see anyway. So you're not going to get very much off for the chassis and underbody. And then flipping over to the street category score sheet, it doesn't have chassis and undercarriage on it. It does have a place for mileage and age and whether it's trailered or not. And the computerized scoring methods usually just automatically calculate the age bonus and the mileage bonus and stick that in. Okay. And note the same notes down here, plus it's got the rules on the 1 point for 5 years and 1 point for 50,000 miles at the bottom. If you can't read it, that's what that says. Okay, modified is different. And modified is important. We put modified in there. It was always in there as custom, but we hadn't used it very much. We changed the name to modified. But modified is designed to allow people to come to concours that have cars that aren't stock anymore. And we don't judge authenticity in modified. And it's really designed to try to get more people to come to concours. And I encourage you to run a modified category if you're running a concours. We do not judge authenticity. We split the points between cleanliness and condition. And we can add additional 4 points for workmanship and additional 4 points for presentation. And this is unique. This is about the only place in Mercedes concours where presentation matters. And so you can consider the utility of the car, what the person does with the car. And so it's not as objective as the other categories, but it is something that I'd like to encourage us to do. All right, so I'm going to talk through now what you might see as you're doing the judging. And I'm not going to talk through everything I've got on every one of these slides, but I'm glad to answer any questions about things that you see over here. Okay, first, we'll talk about interior upholstery and trunk. And honestly, I don't see very many cracked dashes in the concours cars, but you see instrument bezels that have gotten a little rusty or corroded. And I'll show you in a little bit heater control levers the older cars pre-1970 or so tend to have 4 heater control levers centerline in the dash, and they tend to get stiff and the levers break off. And if you're not used to seeing those 4 levers, if they're all broken off, you may actually not even notice they aren't there. So look for those in 109s, 108s, pagodas, things like that. Wood finish, it's not unusual to see cracks in the wood, or even wood that doesn't quite match if they've done some refinishing but didn't refinish all of the wood. Sun visors, the 107s are kind of famous for having sun visors that kind of lose their shape. 129s have plastic parts that crack for the at the base of the sun visor. Almost all of those will be cracked by now if they're not replaced. Stains on the headliner. A lot of the headliners and tops are glued, and if they're not replaced very, very well, there can be glue in places that it's not supposed to be. By incorrect upholstery changes, and for a 4-seater car, the front seats get more usage than the rear seats, and a lot of the times people just replace the upholstery on the front seats, and often the leather on the front seat doesn't match the leather in the back seat very well. So when you're doing interior, take a look at that and see. The other thing I'll mention, I'll wait for that a couple of slides later, that on leather. And I'll mention first aid kits. Cars before about 1972 are not going to have first aid kits. Cars after 1972, there's a first aid kit delete option. And so if you don't see a first aid kit, you might want to ask the entrant if he has the first aid kit delete option. And of course, you can always look at, ask to look at toolkits. That's on the score sheet. Here's some examples. This is a very nice car, but it's got some stains on the interior of the headliner, and there's actually a little bit of marking of dirt around this pin right here. I should sit over here. Here's the stains, and here's the kind of little dirt on the interior. And these are all very nice. This is a good-looking piece of wood, a nice radio. Over here, this is a very nice latch. And look at the leather here. Now, the rule here on leather is that cracks are okay in leather. We call it patina, as long as it doesn't crack through the color layer. So seeing this is perfectly acceptable. It's when it cracks through the color layer that you start deducting for it. All right, here is a pagoda, a 113. Okay, this one has an aftermarket radio, which is an authenticity deduction. This is one of the cars that has 4 of these levers up here. You notice this one has a broken off lever, so that's a condition deduction. The clock, you can check whether the clock works or not. We expect the cars to be fully operational. You can even have them start the cars. I don't usually do that because I feel like I'm very pressed for time when I'm doing judging, but you can check for operability of everything on the car pretty much if you want. But just remember, you have to do the same thing on every car for consistency. And so if you check that the clock is working on this car, check it on every other car. And pagodas are not built with air conditioning from the factory. And we have a special rule for pagodas that the dealer installed air conditioning on a pagoda is acceptable and is not to be deducted for. However, this is not the factory, or excuse me, not the dealer installed AC. Now, let me show you. Okay, this is what the 2 dealer installed AC units on a pagoda look like. The first one, the Coolmeister, the second one, the Frigid King, and there's something similar about them. Note the configuration. It's vent, panel, vent, panel, vent. And on the other, it's vent, panel, vent, panel, vent. And so even from a distance, you can tell whether it's got one of these or not. And if it wasn't done by the dealer when the car was delivered, it will probably not have one that looks like that. And then that becomes an authenticity deduction. But these are okay. Don't deduct for these. Okay, so another point I want to make is that you have to deduct points based on it's the significance with respect to how much is on the scorecard for them. Let's consider this car. Now, we are the interior judge, so take a look at the scorecard for interior, and we're judging here, we're judging the steering wheel and we're judging the dashboard. Now look at steering wheel, gear shift, and signal stalks. And there's a maximum of 2 points. All right, looking at the steering wheel. Now it's got a wrap on it that did not come from the factory like that. That's an authenticity deduction. If you look over here, there's a crack. Okay, that's a condition deduction. There's actually the whole chrome horn ring is a little bit pitted. You may not be able to see that, but it is slightly pitted. And there's a mark here, there's a mark here. Now, what if you were to just say, I'm going to take a quarter off for every one of those? Okay, that would add up to at least 1 point, if not more. But look at your scorecard. Okay, it's got 2 points spread across steering wheel, gear shaft, and signal stalks. And we hadn't even looked at the gear shift or the signal stalks yet. And so we can't take that much off just for the steering wheel. And so you might say, well, there's 3 things that 2 points is spread out across. And so maybe the steering wheel is worth about 2/3 of a point. So we probably shouldn't be taking off more than about 2 deductions of a quarter, or maybe 3 deductions of a quarter on the steering wheel. And so use that logic as you're taking points off. And that logic becomes especially important when you look at the dashboard. When you look at the scorecard here, it says dash, instruments, radio, clock, glove box, console, and there's only 3 points there. That's the whole dashboard, the console, the glove box, and there's a lot of stuff there. The instruments, the radio, all that, and it's only 3 points. And so you have to be very careful not to over penalize out of proportion to what it is. If we're looking at this car, it's got an aftermarket radio. It looks like all the knobs are there, or all the vent stalks are there. But the aftermarket radio is certainly a quarter point deduction, and the clarity of the picture isn't enough to see the instruments very well. But the fit of the wood up here isn't very good. Looks like there may be a crack over here, and that might be a little bit of delamination of the lining here. But my point here is that you have to be very, very careful to understand how much your area is worth and not overdo it. It would be really easy to take off more than 3 points, but you can't do that. And the computerized scoring systems won't let you do that. If you're doing this with a paper scorecard, you could inadvertently take off more points than are even in the area. So just be cognizant of that as you're doing the scoring. That's a very important basic point. Okay, let's shift over to paint and coach work. There's a lot of things you'll see here. Stone chips on the hood, maybe some rust because of the stone chips on the front valance, chips, door dings. I mentioned the paint color change, and here's the rule about half a point if it's a color change, quarter if it's correct for the year. Now let's talk about orange peel. Now, orange peel is a condition where the paint kind of looks like an orange peel. Older Mercedes from the factory have no orange peel because the older finishes are buffed out perfectly from the factory. And what you sometimes see, and I'm going to go ahead and go to this next. Here's an example. Up in the corner here, it's very hard to get a good picture of orange peel. Up in the corner here, see how that kind of is unlevel, kind of looks like the surface of an orange? That's orange peel. Older Mercedes, say before about 95, you don't see orange peel on the car from the factory. But for starting about 1995, they changed the paint, and you will see orange peel on all newer Mercedes. And so when you get newer than about 95, you will see orange peel consistently along the car. Now, for a restored older Mercedes, what often happens is, they're using maybe lacquer-based paint, something that you can rub, and so they'll rub it so there's no orange peel visible in the areas that are easy to rub. But if you look carefully between, say, the lights in the grill or something like that, you might see orange peel in those areas. And so if you see orange peel on a 50s or 60s Mercedes, it didn't come from the factory that way, and it's a deduction. All right, next slide here. In some other areas here, when the Mercedes comes from the factory, the gaps on the fenders, doors, and hood are perfect. And so you can compare them to each other and see if they look correct or not. This is a picture of a Mercedes where the hood gap on one side is significantly different than the hood gap on the other side. And this is done with the car all closed up initially when you first get to the car. Note this chrome strip. The car did not come from the factory with this chrome strip here. So that is a deduction as well. For pagodas, if you don't know about pagodas and you do a restoration on a pagoda, you will obliterate this little notch right here. The pagoda grill, the headlight grill, is the same on left side and right side. And the car has a kind of character mark, a horizontal mark on the outside of the fender. And since the same headlight grill is used on both sides, Mercedes put a little notch on the inside of the fender too to match that mark. If someone restores one of these cars that doesn't know that that's there, it will be obliterated. And so in a pagoda, you always look for this little notch on the inside of the fender. And I remember one concours I went to, there were three pagodas. Two of them did not have this little mark on it. And so if that's not there, that's a quarter-point deduction or something like that. Note here, this hubcap would normally be painted. You never see them in this condition. And so the white wall or not doesn't matter, but the hubcap on this car originally had probably body color. Now for sight lines, you stand back and look at the gaps, and then you get up close and look at the reflections and sight the lines down the body to see that they're straight. And you look at the reflections to see if there's poor body work on the side. Now this is a 600, and the 600 has fender lip chrome. There aren't very many Mercedes that have fender lip chrome. It's only the 600s, early 50s, 300S, 300 SE coupes and convertibles from 62 to 67, the 300 SC from 56 to 58, and the 220S and SE coupe and convertible from 56 to 61. And those are listed in the rule book. Those are the only ones that have fender lip chrome. You will see 107s a lot with fender lip chrome. It's not correct for a 107. For the tops, and notice the top is also in the paint and the coachwork category. An original Mercedes top in the plastic area has a mark that looks like this. And we went round and round on how much you should take off if it's got a perfect top, but it doesn't have that on it. So it's not an original Mercedes top. And we finally defined in the rule book, take off a quarter point. For a top that looks like the correct material, looks like the right plastic, but just doesn't have the Mercedes logo in it, just take off a quarter point. And I mentioned earlier, tell the entrant if you see a safety issue. And note the sidewall cracking on this tire. I mean, and in one case, I saw this, pointed it out to the entrant. He was absolutely unaware that this happened. And in street category, you're not even judging the tire, but I happened to just notice this. Note that the tire date code here is the last two digits of the DOT number, and less than 10 years is safe, and over 10 years is probably a little bit much. If the car is just used for concours, that's fine. A trailer to the event or something like that, but you don't want to be driving on the street with the tires that are much older than 10 years. All right, let's look at this car. Now, I recognize that some of you resolution or color resolution on your monitors may not allow you to see it the way I see it. But see, if you're the paint and coachwork judge and you're standing off looking at this, okay, the first thing you should probably notice is that the door gap on the rear of this car is different from the door gap on the front of the door. And that's a deduction. And if you look at this at the scorecard, gaps under paint and coachwork, gaps, doors, hood, deck lid, that's only a maximum of 2 points. So that's probably just a quarter point or so for that. Looking further at the car, and you may not be able to see this on your monitor, the door is a different shade than either the panel in front of it or behind it. So it looks like it's been repainted. And of course, if the door gap is different, it was probably in an accident and did have to be repainted. And so the note that there is a paint color on the scorecard, maximum points 2. And so I might take off a quarter point for that, for the door paint not matching. And since under paint and coachwork, the wheels and the wheel covers are also included, note that it's missing a lug bolt. I consider that a safety issue, so I would point that out to the entrant. And there's only, under wheels and wheel covers, there's only 1 point. And so, take off maybe a quarter point, but don't take off more than that. If you're in doubt on these gaps or the color, look at the other side of the car. And this is the other side of the same car. Notice the door gaps are really good on this side, and the paint color is the same. Oh, note, he's also missing another lug bolt on this side. I'd still probably only take off the quarter point I've already taken off, because there's only 1 point in there for the wheels, and half of that's condition and half of that's authenticity. And condition wise, they're otherwise pretty good, and authenticity, they're really the correct wheels. So, quarter point's probably enough. Again, don't over penalize. Okay, for this one, and when you're looking at the body work, you really have to look at the reflection off the side of the car and see what you see, because that'll disclose poor body work. In this case, note here, there's a door ding right here. You can only see that in the reflection. There's a door ding right here. You can only see that in the reflection. So you got to look at the reflection for this. But the reason I bring this up is, how much do you take off for these door dings? Well, there's 2 door dings, and we're in perhaps quality of body work. You might want to put it there. You might want to put it in imperfections in paint. What matters is that for every car that you do, you put it in the same place. If you were to look carefully at this car, it has a lot of door dings. You can't just take off a quarter point for every door ding on this car. There's probably 10 door dings on this car. I know, because I own this car. I was driving it today. And so you can't over penalize for these things. You've got to take off the amount appropriate for the significance, but don't overdo it. Okay, for the chassis, there's only 8 points in here on the chassis. It astounds me that people don't want to be in show class because they're worried about the chassis, and you can't even see a lot of the car. So I encourage people to do the entire show class and have the undercarriage judged. And what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at what you can see of the front and the rear suspension and the springs. The springs, by the way, normally have color codes on them. They often have 2 different sets of color codes. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. Like what the shocks look like. You probably aren't even going to be able to see the center drive shaft. You can see the half shafts, the axle shafts sometimes. Unless it's a Geländewagen with a high ground clearance, you probably never see the flex discs. You will probably be able to see the exhaust system. You'll probably be able to see the wheel wells, and you'll probably be able to see whether there are any leaks or not. So let me show you a few pictures. Okay, this is a picture of the color codes on the springs, and they often have 2 sets of color codes. One is a manufacturer set of color codes, and the other is a Mercedes set of color codes. It's not deficient to not have the color codes. I just wanted to let you know that there are color codes on these springs. And also, let me go back. Also, the color in the wheel well. For cars built in about the 1950s, the wheel wells are probably going to be black. As you get into the 70s and the mid 80s, they're often a gray undercoat, and then they kind of transition, and a lot of them are body color. So if you're looking at, say, an 80s or 90s car, and you've got a wheel well that's black, shiny black undercoating, or shiny black undercoating under the car, it's probably not original. And go look other places on the car and see what the real color it was supposed to be. Okay, here's an exhaust system. If you look at the scorecard under where we are, chassis and underbody, you'll see that the exhaust system is only 1 point. And of course, half of that's authenticity, and half of it's condition. That is an authentic Mercedes exhaust, okay? But it's got some rust here, it's got some rust here, generally surface rust, no penetrations. So you might take off a quarter for that. And if you look more carefully down at the back of the lower control arm, the paint's flaking off the lower control arm. And if you look suspension, springs, shocks, there's only 1 point there. So that's a lot of things. So you might only take a quarter point off for that. Again, take off in proportion to its significance with the amount of points you have available to deduct. Okay, glass lights, rubber chrome trim. There's a lot of stuff here. And it's useful to really have that scorecard in front of you for this one. But I'm not going to go over all these pieces. But remember I said in street, it's okay to have European headlights. In show, the car has to have the headlights it was delivered with. You often see turn signal lenses not fitted correctly, especially if you stand behind the car. Sometimes you see the rear light assemblies have dipped instead of being straight. Notice I put correct windshield on here. Basically, all Mercedes have some type of sticker in the lower right corner of the windshield. The stickers change by year, but there's usually a signature there. And on the older cars, it's a white sticker. On the newer cars, it's a mostly transparent sticker. And very often you'll see a Mercedes part number and a 3-pointed star on the windshield itself. I mentioned fender lip chrome, how you don't have any fender lip chrome on cars after about 1970. And if you have anything you want to ask about, I'm not going to talk through each of these. But let's talk through a few obvious things here. Now, this is a 600, and it's a really nice fit and finish of the turn signal and light into the chrome. Notice also it's a 600. It has fender lip chrome. That's correct for a 600. Over here on the 280 SE, 280 SEs do not have fender lip chrome, so it is not correct for it. And personally, I really, really dislike fender lip chrome for a very basic reason. They're a really good place for rust to start undetected and help the car rust out on you, and you do not want that. Okay, this is a interesting car. You see it has US bumpers and European headlights. Now in street category, that's okay. In show category, you require the lights as they're originally delivered. Okay. This one has some hood gap issues too, but we're in glass lights, rubber, and chrome trim, so we're not looking at hood gap issues. Okay, so let's look at this car. This is I think it's an 85 380 SL. And it's a very nice car. We're not taking off for pinstripes anymore. But notice it has chrome around the fender lips. That's not okay. How much do we take off? Okay, so let's look at our score sheet. We're looking at where it says side trim, antenna, side mirrors. That's side trim. It's only 2 points there, and it's spread between the side trim, the antenna, and the side mirrors. There's 4 of those, and some people might want to say, well, 4 deductions of a quarter point. Hey, that'd be too much. You only have 2 points to play with there. And it's an authenticity issue, and only half the points are authenticity. You could only take off a total of 1 point, but you got to spread that over the side trim, the antenna, and the side mirrors. So, I might take off a half point. You could justify a quarter point. And most importantly, from car to car, if you see this again as you're judging that day, take off the same amount. That's the most important piece, the consistency part of it. But you'll see this on 107s a lot. And it promotes rust. It's really a bad thing. Okay. Engine compartment, my favorite place. Okay. Lots of things in the engine compartment. from leaks, of course, and as I said, if you see a safety issue like a coolant leak or a fuel leak, certainly point that out immediately to the entrant. But it's very easy to have corrosion on things, on the water pump, on the fan clutch. The fan belts are generally going to be continental, but they're often rotated in a place where you can't see them anyway. Fuel stains. Very often, if there is leakage from the brake master cylinder, it will run down under the master cylinder. So if you look under the master cylinder, you'll see corrosion and paint that has come off of the brake booster. And you might need a flashlight to do that. It is okay to use a flashlight. I always use a flashlight when I'm doing this judging. And why do I always use a flashlight when doing this judging? Well, one, it makes it easier to see things. The other thing about a flashlight is it focuses your attention on where the beam is. And so if there's specific things you want to look at and you're trying to be consistent and you want to look in the same place every time, a flashlight helps you do that. And so I always carry a small flashlight when I'm doing this. Okay, the battery. If you read the rules carefully, a battery that says Mercedes on it is okay. So for Concours, you're really expecting the battery to be a Mercedes battery, okay? And if you're familiar with the engine compartments, a lot of the Mercedes have really neat, beautiful chrome wire ends, and some of the aftermarket ones are ugly rubber things. So you're expecting to see the original looking wire ends. Also, Mercedes generally uses black ignition wires, not blue ones or red ones. The other thing you often see for especially the older cars that have aluminum valve covers is sometimes people excessively polish the aluminum valve covers. They were delivered generally without a lot of polish on them, so they're kind of dull looking. That's normal. And we penalize over polishing them unless the person can show that it was delivered by the factory with that polish. It's not unusual for the hood pads to sag. You have to replace hood pads periodically on these cars. And the yellow cadmium finish, it's not unusual for folks to send parts out and have them re-cad plated, and that's getting kind of expensive and hard to do. Hose clamps are an easy thing to take a look at. I'll show you correct hose clamps and incorrect hose clamps. Oftentimes when people paint things that are black in the engine compartment, they use a glossy black, and most of the engine compartment black in Mercedes is either a matte or a semi-gloss. It's very often they're too glossy. And the engine compartment is often where you pick up on a color change. Now, if you're not the paint and exterior finish person, you can't do anything about it because you can't go grab that person and tell them. But you can see often where the paint has been, the color has been changed, because oftentimes folks will not pull the engine to paint appropriately around the engine. But so you can, there's a place on the scorecard for the firewall, underhood, and grommets, and you can deduct for that in there. And let's see, run color hood springs. Hood springs are almost always body color, and very often they end up painted black. Okay, let me show you some things. Now, first over here, see this shiny line here? Mercedes did not deliver the car that way. Okay, so that's not original. But what I really want to show you on this one is the hose clamps. These hose clamps, the Mercedes original hose clamps, do not show rubber through. They're solid hose clamps. And if you look down here, we call these Yankee clamps. You can see the rubber. These are usually on American cars, and you can see the rubber through the hose clamp. And they tend to damage the hoses, which is why Mercedes does not use them. And if you notice here in this picture where I'm showing my cursor, the yellow cad plating, these fuel lines are plated. What you'll often find is that the yellow cad plating will be coming off of the original lines. Okay, looking here, this is not a Mercedes radiator cap. It's not correct. There's also some corrosion on top of this radiator. It's a good Continental belt and a good Mercedes hose clamp. Note the corrosion on this hose clamp down here. Note the corrosion on this exhaust manifold. if you're judging R107s, you will see corrosion on the exhaust manifold. Every car you judge will have corrosion on the exhaust manifold, so just be consistent in what you do with that. And again, Yankee clamps here, see that there's rubber visible through these holes, so it's not an original Mercedes hose clamp. And that's probably what you see the most often on a lot of cars where people don't understand the difference. Okay, this is an ignition module that did not come with the car. It's mounted kind of with sheet metal screws to the firewall. This is a non-Mercedes battery. Often you see battery tie downs that don't effectively restrain the battery as well. But this has a K&N logo over here. That's not okay. There's a crack. You can't probably see it in your picture. There's a crack in this grommet in the firewall. And this down here, the air filter intake, air intake is dented here. This plastic is discolored and it's generally pretty dirty. You don't usually see cars that look like this in Concours. Now, these are two original pictures. These are not from modern cars. I went back in the files and found these just to show you the batteries that a 190 SL comes with and the battery that a Pagoda comes with. The original battery in a 190 SL has exposed intercell connectors. Notice it's a 6-cell battery, but you can see the connections between the cells up on the top. It's called a tar top battery. There's actually reproduction tops that people buy and stick on the battery. And if I mean, you probably wouldn't notice that it's not really a tar top battery. The original battery manufacturers, by the way, before Mercedes started making Mercedes branded batteries, were Varta, Hopecki, and Bosch. And so notice this is a Varta battery here in this 190 SL. When you get up to the Pagodas, they don't have the tar top batteries with the exposed intercell connectors anymore, but you see the old-fashioned batteries with the screw top caps to get to the electrolyte on the batteries. And this is a period picture of a Pagoda. Now, based on the way our rule book is written, if you saw one of these with a Mercedes battery in it, that would be okay. Although it would be more correct to have the tar top battery for the 190 SL and the caps like this on a Pagoda. All right, next slide here. More engine compartment. If you look at this gooey sealant here, it certainly didn't come from the factory with this sealant squishing out here, nor with this corrosion on the bolts. And but this picture shows good yellow cad plating on the fuel lines and a nice hose on the diesel. This one has a leak of oil coming out of the valve cover here. And if you look at the aluminum here, this is a bit shinier than it came out of the factory with. Now, there are probably a few cars running around like Pagodas that were show cars and were delivered with a very, very shiny valve cover. And if the owner can document that, that's perfectly fine. But the typical Pagoda is not shiny. The valve cover is not shiny. And overshining these is a deficiency. Okay. Mercedes did not generally use blue ignition wires, so that's a deficiency. And notice if you look at this fan, it has rusty bolts. That's a deficiency. Okay, so let us just look at this engine compartment and get an idea for how many points we're going to deduct for this thing. This is a like 89 560 SL, and it's actually a really good engine compartment. There's not much to take off for on this one, but if you look at this, the coolant reservoir is discolored, and if you're using your scorecard, cooling system is a 2-pointer, and that's a condition deduction. I might take off a 1/4 point for that. And looking around without magnifying it too awfully much, the only other thing that I really see here, if you look over at the braking system, now the brake fluid is essentially black and opaque. Now, I guarantee this car was delivered from the factory with amber transparent brake fluid. And so I would deduct for that. And honestly, I consider that a safety deficiency. I'd probably tell the owner that he needs to change his brake fluid. Mercedes specifies changing brake fluid every 2 years on these cars, and in 2 years it doesn't look like that. It takes much longer to turn black like that. And that's a safety issue because brake fluid's hygroscopic and the boiling point lowers drastically as it gets wet. The other thing you see on these cars, notice that this is an aluminum unpainted air cleaner. And a lot of the times you will see either a lot of corrosion on these, so they don't look like, they look like they've got marks or spots on them, or people will over polish them. You could polish this like a mirror if you wanted to. It wouldn't be correct, and we'd penalize it. So be aware of that for the cars that have the M117 engine. That's true for 560 SLs, 560 SECs, 560 SELs, all those cars with that engine. Okay. And if you look carefully at the score sheet, there's things that aren't on the score sheet. So what do you do with them? Well, one, be consistent with whatever you do with them. But you notice that the air cleaner's not on there. So where do you put it? And I would probably put it in miscellaneous items not covered. The windshield wipers are not on the score sheet. Where would you put it? Well, maybe windshield seal and trim. Well, the belts really aren't on the score sheet. So, but the systems are, like the cooling system, the HVAC system, so you can put it under there, or you could use miscellaneous items not covered. Above all, though, be consistent. How about improper ride height? That's an interesting one because it's really only in chassis and underbody, under suspension, springs, and shocks. And so if you're doing street and you've got improper ride height, you don't have any place to take off for that. So, but above all, for when you see little things like that, just be consistent. You may not just see one car that has this deficiency. You may see a number of them. Take off the same amount for the same thing. Okay. All right. So my little summary here. If you get the point that consistency is vital, then you've got just about the major point of this. You've got to be consistent to be objective and be fair in this judging. Now, in most of the things you're going to do, points are split between authenticity and condition. And it's really important to deduct points in proportion to the maximum points for that area, and be very cognizant of that with the score sheet. Fortunately, the computerized scoring methods will pretty much limit you from overdoing it excessively, but paper score sheets, you can really screw that up if you're not paying attention. And of course, in the modified category, you don't score authenticity. And remember, we want Concours to succeed. We want it to continue into the future. We want entrants to come back, and so we want them to enjoy it. We want them to come back. So treat them that way. Thank them for coming. If you're using paper score sheets, it's appropriate to write a very pleasant note. Never write anything nasty about the cars. Never say anything nasty about the cars, no matter what, because we want them to come back and we want Concours to continue. And without entrants, we can't do it. Of course, without judges, we can't do it either. All right, any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions over in chat. Okay, I want to take a short break, and I'm going to give a really short quiz. This is going to be significantly shorter than some of the ones I've done before, and like I said, I do have to be over at Rich's house at 7:45 in the morning, so didn't want to make this to be too long a presentation either. Are there any questions at all right now? Glad to address questions, and we don't have a
Gary,
lot of folks, so it's pretty easy to address them.
Gary,
Okay, I'm going to end slideshow here and come out of screen share. I think I am. Here we go. Stop share. Okay, here we are. All right, no questions? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break.
Yeah.
And
Question.
okay, go ahead. Who is that?
That's Rich Maybe.
Okay, Rich, go ahead.
The availability of the cars during judging. If your car is entered and you're judging, how do we coordinate that? Do we do that to judges meeting in the beginning? So we let the judges know that's going to judge the category we're in so they can come and get us, or, because that sometimes gets be a pain.
There are two ways I've seen doing that. The most effective way I've seen is for the judge to put a note on the car that says judges are authorized to touch the car.
Right, right. I remember that.
Okay, so that's worked pretty well. The other thing I've seen is, especially in a class that requires presentation, like for modified, because you really want to be there to do that presentation. I've seen provision of the phone number of the judge so that you call that person and they break away from judging, you know, which pretty much stops the judging that you're doing. But he runs over and presents he or she runs over and presents the car and then comes back. I've seen that technique used at Porsche Works Reunion. It does slow down your judging because you basically have to stop what you're doing.
Right.
Okay. Other questions?
Can you just give the judges permission to open the car to judge it?
Yes,
And you
Jim.
don't have to stop what you were doing?
Yes, Jim, that's what I said. You can actually put a sign on the car that says judges are authorized
Okay.
to touch and open the
All right.
car. In fact, I
The
usually
other
put it-
thing is, I'm in the factory just about every week, sometimes twice a week. So I see the aluminum that's on the engine and transmission and the body. It is very, very shiny the way it's made. And we also have to show the paint process. We've got examples of a door that hasn't been painted and then, you know, the various steps they do. One that hasn't been painted looks gray like you see most cam covers on Mercedes. It's been there 10 or 15 years and it gets gray. It corrodes. It just doesn't perforate like steel does.
Right.
So it is made shiny.
Mhm.
And I've picked mine all up from the factory and it is shiny when you get it.
Are
It's
your
hard
valve
to
covers
keep it that way.
Are your valve covers shiny?
Yes, yes. If you keep hand cleaning it, you can keep it about the way it was made. It's hard to do it, but it looks shinier than most people. Most of them do look gray like you were showing. And they were not made gray looking like that.
We've been penalizing that since Pete Lesler's days.
I know it. And Pete looks at mine and he says, well, that's kind of shiny, but I like it. And he didn't penalize me because we have that.
Well, on the other hand, he did. He looked at my air cover cleaner and it looked just like it was when I got it the day I drove it off of the dealership. And he said it was too shiny. And
he took off for it.
He took off for it, and I think I lost the first place trophy because.
Oh God! Yeah.
So maybe we should revise that in the rule book. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you've taken a buffer and made it look like chrome, but like Diana said, it's supposed to be pretty shiny when it's made.
Okay. Well, I'll take that back to the committee. Any other comments? Dale, it looks like you got your hand up, but you're muted.
Yeah, just go ahead and shout out your questions. That's such a small girl.
Dale, go ahead and ask. I think you're trying to.
Hey, I've got a question.
Okay, who's that?
Steve Hagershire.
Okay, Steve, go ahead.
What it is my car has the Salina Gray Magna. Okay.
Steve, I'm having a real hard time understanding. If you get closer to the mic or something like that.
Let me turn my audio off and off.
Yeah. Maybe Steve, why don't you type your question into chat, and I think that might work better.
Okay, let me see where.
Yeah, that would be good. So I can't make out your words.
Gary, a quick one.
Yeah, Dale, while he's trying.
Yeah, what about European bumpers? US lights and European bumpers?
Well, it's kind of funny that we didn't make any provision for swapping to European bumpers in the rule book. And though intuitively it seems like that would be okay, the rule book does not allow that.
But it would be okay? I mean, at our level anyway.
Well, a couple of things I'll mention. The rule book is specifically for national level events, and a local chapter can pretty much do what they want, although we'd like to be consistent. But by the letter of the law, in street class even, if you swap a US car to the European bumpers, that's a deficiency, because the rule book just doesn't make an allowance for that. It makes an allowance for the headlights. It doesn't make an allowance for the bumper, although logically maybe it should. And I'll mention that next time we get together and talk about the rule book.
Here's the thing though, the first 2 years of the 107 and the first year of the 116 had the European bumpers and US lights.
Oh, they
You're
certainly
gonna see some completely original cars that look like that.
Oh, I've got one of those. I'm certainly aware of that. And that's as it was delivered.
And the other thing is that people that brought in gray market cars would have the European bumpers, and some states forced them to put US lights in them.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody was going to ask that question, because the rule book
But
does
I think
make
the rule book says you can do that if
yes, it does. It says
Yeah.
if unless required by safety requirements. And so,
Right.
yeah,
Mhm.
you could
So Dale, that's how you would get around it.
you could justify that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here's
Well,
Steve. Here's
technically,
Steve's
most-
question. Here's Steve's question. He typed it in.
Okay, so Steve
Okay,
has
A flat matte Sailonite gray Magno, and he has a wrap over it that does not change the color of the car, but protects it. Is there a deduction?
okay, so that's like paint protection film. It sounds like it. That's really the question of, if I have paint protection film over it, is that a deduction? So the question is, did it come from the factory with paint protection film? If the answer is yes, it came from the factory with paint protection film, there's no deduction. If it did not come from the factory with paint protection film, there's a deduction. However, I'll say more about that. The deduction is probably not going to be very big. It might be a quarter point. And that might mean that you don't have any stone chips in it. So you could probably, not have any deductions for stone chips and all that stuff. So, it might be a deduction, but it might very well be a something that helps you out score wise anyway.
What
Okay, any
about
other questions?
a repaired stone chip? Do you take off the same for that as you would for a non-repaired one?
Well, it's interesting you ask that question, because in the Porsche Club of America, if you just touch up a stone chip, you don't take off for it. There's no provision in the Mercedes-Benz Club of America rule book for that. If you can see the stone chip, it's a deduction, whether it's been attempted to be touched up or not. The only real repair for stone chip is to make it invisible. And if it's invisible, it's not a deduction, of course. So
Yeah.
we don't make that provision.
Porsches get a lot of stone chips on their nose.
Yeah, but PCA concours, Porsche Club concours rules, it's almost all cleanliness, and to the point where they allow you to touch the car and they run their finger along the lid in the engine compartment and so
On the fenders too, don't they?
Yeah.
They go into the lip of the fender.
Yeah, I do not like PCA rules. I like our rules much better.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, let's take about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we will do a little short quiz. And the quiz is, for those of you who've done this before, the quiz is a lot shorter. Just trying to make some salient points and then give you the basics. And there aren't very many people in this group either, and half of you have been through this before. So
Out of the two?
I've got another meeting I've got to get to right now. So.
Well, Jim, you're qualified.
Yeah, Jim,
Yeah.
you're qualified.
I've already taken it once. Huh?
Yeah, you gave this training
Three
before I
times
did.
or 4 times.
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah, I think
slow
I've taken
learner.
I've taken this training from you a couple of times.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, let me go off to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Okay.
Super.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.